Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe. And don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week, we are going to be talking about a solved case from Arkansas. When a woman and her nephew were found shot to death in a cabin, it soon became clear that the motive for the killings was robbery, given their family's wealthy status in the community. Quickly, a top suspect was identified, and despite his claims that two people were involved in this crime, ultimately only one would be convicted and sent to prison. The perpetrator spent decades behind bars, but was eventually released when someone very unexpected helped him to receive parole, and even helped him to get back on his feet when he was a free man. But this killer proved that old habits die hard. The prison hadn't rehabilitated him, as 24 years after he committed double homicide, he struck again. He killed for a third time. He actually killed a member of the same family, the very same person who'd literally helped him to get his life back on track, and this was how he'd repaid them. Join me as we delve into the wild case of the Snowden family murders. But quickly, before we get into the case, I would just like to say a big thank you to June's Journey for very kindly sponsoring this section of the video. Now, the regular viewers of my channel will know that June's Journey is a mobile game that I have played and loved for a long time now. It's a hidden object mystery game set in the gorgeous glamour of the 1920s where you get to play detective. You are June Parker, a smart and independent woman who is trying to solve the murder of her sister Claire and uncover the many secrets within the Parker family. You'll collect different clues as you complete each level, which will bring you one step closer to solving the mystery, and you even get to renovate and decorate the Parker family's old and rundown mansion and the garden surrounding it. So there's not just the mystery element to the game, there's also a fun design element too. And right now, June's Journey are actually celebrating their spooky-versary, celebrating 8 years of the game, and as always, there will be lots of special Halloween-themed events happening. You can expect Halloween surprises throughout the entire month of October, including a thrilling mystery left for you by June Parker herself. You'll have the chance to earn powerful game bonuses and rare decorations that you can use on your island. You can literally transform your island into a haunted Halloween fantasy. And I would highly recommend watching the video series on June's Journey's YouTube channel because you'll get the chance to win exclusive in-game rewards. So I'll link their channel down below, as well as a link to download the game itself. Of course, June's Journey is available to download for free on both iOS and Android devices, as well as on PC. So you can download via the link in the description box, or you can scan the QR code that is on the screen. Play now to unlock access to exclusive content and take part in these spooky celebrations. Thank you so much once again to June's Journey for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Thank you as always to you guys for always showing your support to the sponsors that we work with on this channel. And now let's just get into the case. So for this week's case, we are going back more than 29 years ago now to the fall of 1996 in Horseshoe Lake, which is a town located in Crittenden County in the state of Arkansas in the US. It's a very small rural kind of area. Apparently in 1996 it had a population of only about 270 people, so a very tiny town indeed. Very much one of those places where everyone knew everyone, a very friendly area where there was a real sense of community. And one family that lived in Horseshoe Lake and had done for a very long time was the Snowden family, which consisted of married couple Robert Snowden II and his wife Grace Snowden. The pair had 4 children together, a son who was also named Robert and 3 daughters named Edith, Dorothy and Sally. And the family owned the what is now considered historic Snowden House in Horseshoe Lake. I believe Robert and Grace Snowden purchased the land that Snowden House is on after he returned from serving in the First World War. They built the house in 1920. And over the years, the structure was built on and developed, and it was kind of considered almost the hub of the town, this big house, this big mansion. It was 6,000 square foot. It was right next to the lake in Horseshoe. It faced the lake, so it had really, really beautiful views. And years later, after her father, Robert Snowden, had passed away, the house, Snowden House, was kind of taken over by one of his and Grace's daughters, Sally. Sally Snowden McKay. Sally took over around 1982, by which time she was 61 years old, and she had been married. She was married to a man named David McKay, and she took his last name, although they ended up divorcing. Sally was also a mother. She had 3 daughters named Grace, Katie, and Martha, and she had worked as an accountant. So I suppose she was thought to be the perfect person to take over Snowden House and kind of run it with her knowledge in finance, and not just Snowden House actually, but also the other properties within the Snowden family estate. The Snowden family were very, very wealthy. They had a number of different houses and cabins around the town, which they would rent out to people, including family members. So for example, Sally herself actually lived in one of the cabins. By the time this case took place, her nephew, Joseph Lee Baker, lived in one of the cabins. I don't think anyone actually lived in the actual Snowden family mansion. I think by 1996, when this case occurred, it was kind of like a show house. It was somewhere that people could rent out for weddings and events and parties. I mean, it was a business, like I said, that Sally ran, and she ran it so well. Sally was very, very business savvy. Her relatives described how she could be very sharp and outspoken. She had no issue with, you know, bossing people around, I guess, and giving her opinion. She always made sure that everything ran smoothly so that Snowden House and her family's estate would continue to be a success. And even by 1996, even by the time Sally was 75 years old, she was still very much involved in the running of Snowden House and the other properties that the family owned, as was her nephew, Lee Baker. So just for a bit about Lee, his mother was Sally's sister, Edith Snowden, and Lee was 51 years old in 1996. He was a father. He had, I believe, 3 sons, one of whom was named Joe, and Lee was a very talented musician, actually. He absolutely adored blues and jazz type music specifically. He loved playing the guitar, he loved to sing. He was actually in a band. He was in a band in Memphis called the Mudboy and the Neutrons, and they were a very popular, well-known rock band in Memphis between like 1970 and 1990. They had a very successful long career as musicians, did Lee and his fellow bandmates, but by 1996, Lee was more so working with his family. With his aunt Sally, like I said, he lived in the cabin next door to his aunt, and he helped her with the kind of general maintenance of the Snowden house and the other properties. And working with his aunt Sally was exactly what Joseph Lee Baker had been doing on the fateful day that this case took place. It was the 10th of September 1996, a Tuesday, and that Tuesday morning, 51-year-old Lee Baker woke up, he got ready for the day, and he headed off to work. He headed to meet his aunt Sally at her cabin, as they were going to be collecting rent that day from the tenants of the other Snowden properties and dropping the deposits off at the bank. However, this was a job that they would never actually end up doing, due to the fact that they would become the victims of the most abhorrent crime. You see, later that same morning, the morning of the 10th of September, a local man happened to stumble upon what appeared to be a car accident just a couple of miles away from where Sally and Lee lived. The local man was driving along this road when he noticed a red-coloured Toyota Camry car that was literally flipped over on its side. Clearly someone had been driving the car very fast. Apparently it hit a tree, and I guess it had to swerve. The driver obviously lost control and they crashed the car, and the car flipped. The car was obviously very damaged. I think the windscreen was smashed, and it was clear that this accident had very recently happened. It had happened that same morning, because when the local man arrived at the scene, he noticed that the engine of the car was still running, and yet no one was in the car. Absolutely no one was inside of this vehicle. So where was the driver? Had they been injured during the crash and taken to the hospital? Had they been able to escape the wreckage and were trying to get some help? And whose car was this? Who owned this red Toyota Camry? Well, with Horseshoe Lake obviously being a very small town where everyone knew everyone, it didn't take long for this local man who stumbled upon the scene to discover the answer to that question. Upon discovering the car crash, rather than calling the police, he actually went to the local grocery store nearby, and I believe he asked the manager of the store if he knew anyone that owned this kind of car, this red Toyota Camry, and the manager did. He could actually only think of one local person who owned this exact vehicle. It was 75-year-old Sally Snowden McKay. the owner of the historic Snowden house. So had Sally been in a car accident? Had she crashed her car? Was she injured? So immediately after this, the local man and the store manager went straight to Sally's house, her cabin, to see if she was there and if she was okay. But it was when they arrived that their concerns for Sally's welfare just grew even more. They pulled up to Sally's cabin and they noticed that there was this white truck parked literally right in front of the back door, and that the screen of the back door had been cut. So it almost looked like the truck had been placed there purposefully to perhaps prevent anyone from getting out of the cabin through the back door. And it turns out that this white truck belonged to Sally's nephew, Lee Baker. But the truck and the cut screen in the back door wasn't the only alarming thing about the cabin. They also quickly identified the smell of smoke. There was smoke coming from the inside of Sally's cabin. So worried that something bad had happened to Sally, the local man and store manager immediately called the emergency services, who quickly arrived at the scene. Firefighters made their way inside the cabin, which was on fire. There was a fire inside Sally's home, and heartbreakingly, once inside, they recovered not just one, but 2 bodies. 2 people were found dead inside of this home. It was the body of a man and the body of a woman, quickly identified as being 75-year-old Sally Snowden McKay and her 51-year-old nephew, Joseph Lee Baker. And their deaths were no accident. The fire was no accident. They hadn't died as the result of being, trapped in the cabin when it was ablaze. Whilst both of their bodies were partially burned, it was determined that Sally and Lee were already deceased by the time the fire had started. They'd actually been shot to death. Whilst no murder weapon, no gun was found at the scene, it was clear that they'd both sustained gunshot wounds and that the fire was likely set intentionally to cover up this crime, to cover up this double murder. The killer was likely hoping that their bodies would burn to nothing, that the cabin would burn to the ground. But of course it didn't. The bodies were found, and thus a double homicide inquiry was launched by the Crittenden County and Arkansas police to work out who could have possibly done this. Who would have wanted this elderly woman and her middle-aged nephew dead? What was the motive behind these killings? Well, it didn't take long for a suspected motive to emerge. Police believed that this was a robbery. You see, the cabin next door to Sally's, Lee's cabin, had also been broken into that same morning, and items had been stolen. Apparently about $500 worth of belongings had been taken from Lee Baker's cabin, and we know that Sally's home had also been broken into because the screen of the back door had been cut, and it's believed that there would have been a lot of cash in Sally's cabin for the killer to take. I mean, she was a very wealthy woman. We know that she and Lee had been collecting rent from tenants that morning, so it appeared as though the killer or killers had broken into Lee's cabin, conducted a successful robbery there, stole a load of items, but then when they broke into Sally's cabin next door, they realised that Sally and Lee were inside as they had been working, and maybe things got out of hand. The perpetrator panicked and they decided to kill Sally and Lee to stop them from going to the police. Maybe they knew the robber. I mean, it was a tiny town. If he was a local, it's likely that they would have known him, and so would have been able to tell the police exactly who was going around committing these burglaries. And so, to stop them from doing so, he decided to murder the witnesses by shooting them to death. So, in a bid to find evidence, forensic teams were sent in to conduct searches of both the cabin and also of Sally's car, her red Toyota Camry. It was clear that that had been stolen by the perpetrator after the murders and that they were the one to crash it just a few miles down the road. It was obviously used as part of their getaway, so would forensics be able to find any evidence in there that they'd left behind? Unfortunately, they didn't really find much evidence in terms of DNA in the cabin, I imagine because the fire would have destroyed that. But thankfully, it was a different story when it came to the red Toyota. In there, forensic investigators were able to find a number of unidentified fingerprints. They found prints on the passenger door handle, on the door frame, they found some strands of hair in the car, and they strongly believe that these DNA samples likely belonged to the killer. So that was a break breakthrough in the case. They could use these DNA discoveries to try and link a suspect to the crime once they had obviously identified a suspect. So as part of their inquiries, police began going door to door asking the local residents if they had seen or heard anything on the day of the murders. They appealed to the public, and quickly an interesting tip came in. A member of the public contacted the police reporting that on the morning of the murders, he recalled having seen a red Toyota Camry, exactly like the car that Sally Snowden McKay owned, driving very, very fast down the road that he lived on in Horseshoe Lake. And inside of the vehicle were two young men, two young black men. The member of the public didn't recognize these boys, but of course, upon learning about the double murders of Sally and Lee and knowing that Sally's red Toyota had been stolen, they decided that they should probably inform the police about this sighting. So now the police had their first big lead. This witness statement indicated that they were looking for two young black men as being responsible for this crime. So they began looking into police records from in and around Horseshoe Lake, looking for young men who fit this description that had been in trouble with the law before. And they also spoke with the other members of the Snowden McKay Baker family, asking them if they could think of anyone who may have been responsible. And actually, someone did. Police took a statement from one of Lee Baker's sons, Joe Baker, and he informed the detectives that he suspected that young local boy Travis Lewis may have had something to do with the killings of his father Lee and great aunt Sally. The reason being because Travis had actually stolen from the family before, prior to the murders taking place. Travis Lewis was just 15 years old at the time that this case occurred. He was just shy of his 16th birthday in the fall of 1996. His mother was named Gladys Lewis. He was one of 5 children. He had 3 sisters and an older brother named Edric. Just as a side note, actually, his brother Edric was also looked at as a potential suspect in the case early on, but he was ultimately ruled out as he had a concrete alibi for the time of the killings. Anyway, he was one of 5 children, and he and his family were locals. Travis had grown up in Horseshoe Lake, and the Lewis family had always been quite close with the Snowden / McKay / Baker family. The Lewises actually rented their home from the McKays, and Travis and Edric used to be good friends with Lee's 3 sons, the Baker boys. They would play out and ride bikes together. They would hang out at each other's houses often, and they loved it, and they never seemed to have any problems. That was until a couple of months before the murders, when Travis stole from the Baker family. Apparently he'd been round their house one day and he'd stolen a load of their video games. At the time, Lee Baker addressed this with Travis's mother Gladys. The games were found in his home, so he had in fact stolen them. And I think they kind of settled this dispute and things died down after this, but of course months later, when the killings occurred and the motive seemed to be robbery, Joe Baker theorized that Travis Lewis may have been involved, since again he had stolen from the family before. And it turns out that he hadn't just stolen video games. Police also discovered that just the year before this case occurred, in 1995, Travis had tried to steal money from Sally McKay. Apparently he tried to cash one of her checks. So this was a boy who had a history of theft against the victims. He matched the description that the witness gave of the people driving Sally's stolen car. He was a young black boy, so police really started to believe that he may have indeed been the perpetrator or one of the perpetrators. So police began looking for evidence which may have linked Travis to the crime, and they discovered that he would have possibly had the opportunity to do so, to carry it out. Obviously, being only 15 years old, Travis was still in school. He attended the Hughes High School in Arkansas. However, the police reached out to the school and they learned that Travis wasn't there on the 10th of September 1996 due to having been suspended for bad behaviour, I believe. So on the day of the murders, he wasn't in school. Coincidence? Now, his mother, Gladys Lewis, would claim to the police that her 15-year-old son stayed home with her all day that day. However, of course, for the detectives, that wasn't really a solid alibi because you know, a mother could lie for her son. In order to protect him, it's possible that she could have been lying for him. So they questioned Travis. They asked him if he had anything to do with what happened to Sally and Lee, to which he said no. He said he was not involved in their death. And so they asked him to do a polygraph test, a lie detector test. From what I can gather, he actually underwent a couple of polygraph tests over a span of a few weeks. And apparently he passed the first few, but he, quote, borderline passed. So he only really just passed them. And then the last polygraph test that he did, which was actually carried out at the Hughes police station, he failed. It indicated that he was being deceptive, and it was following the results of this polygraph test that Travis Lewis seemed to crack, and he completely changed his entire story of that day. So initially, 15-year-old Travis Lewis claimed that he had nothing to do with the homicides and that he was at home with his mother Gladys all day on the day that they occurred. However, now his new story was completely different. He now admitted that he was involved in the robbery aspect of this crime, but not the actual killings themselves. Travis claimed that on the morning of the 10th of September, he left his house on his bicycle and he headed towards Lee Baker's cabin, sure enough, intending to break in and commit a burglary there. However, during his journey, he bumped into a friend of his. According to a documentary that I watched about this case, this friend was named Andre, who was also a young black boy. He told Andre what his plan was, that he was going to rob Lee Baker's house, and Andre actually wanted to join him. In fact, Andre said to Travis, whilst you rob Lee Baker's house, I'll break into his aunt Sally's cabin next door and rob her place. So they went to the cabins. Travis went into Lee's, started going around the place, taking items of value, and he claimed that sometime after Andre pulled up outside of Lee's cabin, he was driving Sally's red Toyota car, and he told Travis that he had just shot and killed both Sally Snowden McKay and Lee Baker with a .25 caliber automatic pistol, and that he needed Travis's help to get rid of the bodies. So they went back to Sally's cabin together. They initially tried to drag the bodies out of the cabin, I think. Perhaps they intended to put them in Sally's car and drive them somewhere. However, they were unsuccessful. The bodies were too heavy to move. And so instead, they decided to set the cabin on fire with the bodies inside. They set fire to some clothing and linen. They rushed out of the house. They actually moved Lee's white pickup truck so that it was blocking the back door. I think initially it was theorized that that was done so that no one would be able to get out of the cabin, but in actual fact it was to stop anyone from being able to get inside and stop the fire. So they moved the pickup truck and then they fled in Sally's car. They sped away from the crime scene. But of course they didn't get very far because Travis claimed that Andre crashed the vehicle after losing control and hitting a tree. After crashing, they both got out of the vehicle and I think they both took off in different directions, and Travis told the police that he later saw Andre throw the pistol, the murder weapon, into the Horseshoe Lake. But just as a side note, the police did search the lake and no gun was actually found. In fact, I don't believe the murder weapon was ever located. So now the police had this second suspect in the crime, this Andre, and potential evidence against him did also start to surface. Apparently police discovered that he'd made an alleged confession to a friend of his following the murders that he was involved. There was also suggestion that he'd gone to the hospital soon after the killings, but that he'd gone under a fake name due to the fact that he'd been injured as a result of crashing Sally McKay's car. So police really did believe that they'd found the two killers, that Andre and Travis Lewis were in this together. They'd committed this crime together. Or at least that was until they realised that they didn't actually have any solid concrete evidence against Andre in particular. When questioned, Andre completely denied it. He said that he had absolutely no part in this crime and that Travis Lewis was lying. He actually said that he wasn't even in Horseshoe that day. He was in another area with his girlfriend that entire day, which his girlfriend did confirm, although again, perhaps not the strongest alibi in the world, as his girlfriend could very well have been lying for him. However, the issue that the police faced with Andre was that there was absolutely no physical forensic evidence linking him to the murders. As we know, the forensic team found a load of prints, fingerprints in Sally's car, which they believed had come from the perpetrators, but none of them seemed to match Andre. But guess who they did match? Travis Lewis. They were able to match a palm print found on the windshield to Travis. They found a number of his fingerprints on the door handle and the door frame of the vehicle. Remember that hair that they recovered from the car? Well, that was also an exact match to Travis too. But yeah, in terms of Andre, there was nothing, zero forensic evidence, which again really meant no solid evidence, not enough to prosecute him anyway. So either he wasn't involved and Travis was lying, or he was, and well, I guess it looked like he was going to get away with it. But I'd be really interested to hear your guys' opinions on that in the comments. Do you think that Andre did have a part in this crime? Or do you think Travis acted alone or with another person entirely? I mean, there was that witness statement of someone seeing two boys driving Sally's car that morning, not just one, two. So yeah, if there was a second killer, was it really Andre or was it someone else? Or do you think that Travis did act alone? Do let me know your thoughts. But anyway, following the realization that there was nothing concrete tying Andre to the killings, he was released. Police had to let him go. He was allowed to walk free, whereas Travis Lewis was arrested. Now, he was originally arrested in early November of 1996 on the charge of robbery. This was following his confession that he had robbed Lee Baker's house, but that Andre was the one who robbed Sally's house and killed them. However, after Andre was let go, Travis's charges were increased. As well as being charged with robbery, he was also charged with 2 counts of capital murder. And despite the fact that he was technically a minor when he committed this crime, he was 15 years old, it was actually decided that he would be tried as an adult. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, they decided that he would be prosecuted as an adult, which meant that under Arkansas state law, he could receive the death penalty if he was convicted. And so with this in mind, prosecutors offered Travis Lewis a plea deal. The deal was that they wouldn't seek the death penalty for him. They would just seek a life sentence if he confessed, if he admitted that he had murdered Sally Snowden McKay and Lee Baker, if he pleaded guilty. And Travis took this deal. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to plead guilty. I think he still claimed that he was innocent, that he wasn't the one who shot Sally and Lee, but he didn't want to be put to death, and so he accepted the plea deal. And when it came to his sentencing, he received 5 years in prison for the robbery charge and 28.5 years in prison for the murder charges, with the recommendation that he should serve at least 70% of that sentence before he became eligible for parole. And with that, Travis Lewis was sent off behind bars. Over the years, he would continue to maintain that he was innocent, that again, he only pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, and I think the majority of his family believed him. His brother Edric believed him, his mother Gladys believed him. Of course, the victims' families, the Snowden McKay Baker family, believed otherwise. They firmly believed that the right person was locked up for this crime, that Travis Lewis was in fact responsible, and that he was exactly where he deserved to be, behind bars. Well, everyone except, it seemed, Martha McKay, one of Sally McKay's daughters. Would you believe it? She actually didn't believe that Travis was responsible, or at least not fully responsible for this crime. In the years after her mother's murder and during the time that Travis was locked up, Martha actually maintained a very close relationship, close friendship with Travis's mother, Gladys. I mean, as I said earlier, prior to the killings, the families were close because they lived within such a small community. But yeah, even after Travis was convicted, Martha remained very friendly with his mother, Gladys Lewis. 10 years after the killings, Martha actually took over her family's historic Snowden house, which was obviously once run by her mother, and she poured a lot of money into it, in restoring and renovating it. She actually spent more than $100,000 on house renovations, and she turned it into a very luxurious bed and breakfast in Horseshoe Lake, and also, again, somewhere that people could hire out for weddings and parties and events, it became even more of a successful business than it was before. And Martha became known in the community as the Lady of the Lake, because obviously the house was right next to the lake. And she even gave Travis's mother Gladys a job at Snowden House. She hired her as a housekeeper, and she offered so much support to Gladys whilst her son was incarcerated. Martha was just such a loving and caring woman. She was very kind. She was a Buddhist, so she strongly believed in forgiveness and second chances, and she actually wanted to help Travis Lewis get a second chance. Like I said, she seemed to believe Travis's story. As I understand it, she believed Travis that there was another person involved in the crime, and that the second person had committed the actual killings, and that he was just involved in the robbery aspect and the cover-up, and she had decided to forgive him for that, forgive him for his part in the crime. Martha even paid for a PI at one point, a private investigator, to try and find the second killer. I suppose find solid evidence to point to either Andre or someone else as being responsible. She pressured the police to reopen the case, and she even started writing to Travis Lewis whilst he was in prison. And Travis wrote back a number of times. He would write to Martha and Martha would respond. They were honestly like pen pals. She kept in regular, constant contact with the man who had been convicted of her mother and cousin's murders. Much to the dismay of Martha's relatives, they understandably weren't comfortable with Martha having contact with Travis. They were concerned about her having contact with him, and they would stress this to Martha, warn her that she should probably stay away from him. But, you know, Martha was an adult and she chose to stand by Travis, to the point where she even attended his first parole hearing in favour of him being released. 20 years after the crime, in 2016, and now 36-year-old Travis Lewis had his first parole hearing. Now, he was ultimately denied parole in 2016, however, he went before the parole board again just 2 years later in 2018, and during his second parole hearing, Martha advocated for him. She advocated for his release, telling the parole board that she believed he deserved to start again and have a second chance, and the board seemed to agree with her. As a result of his second hearing, 38-year-old Travis Lewis was granted parole after more than 2 decades behind bars. He was finally let out of prison that same year in 2018, and not only did Martha help Travis to actually be released, she also helped him once he'd been set free. She helped him to get back on his feet by offering him a job working at Snowden House, just like his mother Gladys. Travis started working as a groundskeeper, I believe, so he would tend to the garden, he would mow the lawn, stuff like that, and he seemed to excel in this job. Martha was happy with his work and they maintained that strong friendship, I suppose. But that all changed in the spring of 2020, less than 2 years after Travis was paroled, when a shocking series of events saw the lovely, kind-hearted and caring Martha McKay become a victim of a truly brutal crime, just like her own mother Sally was 24 years earlier. In the early hours of the morning, on the 25th of March 2020, 2 deputies with the Crittenden County Sheriff's Department were dispatched to Snowden House in Horseshoe Lake, after it was reported that a load of alarms in the house were going off as if someone had broken in. So police made their way to the house. They made their way inside the huge property through the open and unlocked back door. They were calling out, asking if there was anyone in the house to make themselves known, and whilst they received no response, they knew that someone was in there because they could hear footsteps. There was someone walking around upstairs. So police are slowly making their way up the stairs, and that was when they noticed what looked like this big bundle of clothes and linen on the floor in one of the bedrooms, and it smelt like some kind of flammable liquid, like someone had poured flammable liquid over this bundle of clothes, I suppose with the intention of setting it on fire. But before officers even really had a chance chance to investigate that further, they suddenly heard one of the doors upstairs slam. It seemed like it was the bathroom door. Someone had just locked themselves in the bathroom. So police go up to the door. They're demanding that the person inside comes out immediately. However, they don't. And they can tell that it's a man inside the bathroom because they could hear him shouting in there. I don't think they could really make out what he was saying. He seemed to just be speaking to himself, shouting to himself, I think. And there was also a lot of banging noises coming from the bathroom. So obviously at this point, police are thinking, we're going to have to bust down this bathroom door to figure out what this man is doing, what these banging noises are. But before they had a chance to do so, all of a sudden, it went silent. The shouting stopped, the banging noises stopped, there was now no noise coming from the other side of this bathroom door. So confused, police looked out of one of the upstairs windows and they soon worked out why the noise had stopped. It seemed as though the man in the bathroom had literally jumped out of the window. He jumped out of the upstairs bathroom window and the officers could see him running away from the house. So they immediately ran after him in pursuit. Apparently initially he tried to jump into a vehicle outside of the property and drive it away, but he was unsuccessful, so he got out of the car, he continued running. The police were chasing him as he was running away from the property. They actually tried to taser him twice, but they were unable to because the man was too far away for the taser to reach him. So they continued running after him, but things quickly took a turn when the man literally jumped into the lake directly opposite Snowden House. To get away from the police, he jumped into the lake and seemed to disappear under the water. And would you believe it? He never resurfaced. Police were watching the lake, waiting for the man to come up for air, and he never did. So they immediately called out search and rescue to try and find him, try and save him. Meanwhile, as all of that was going on, officers returned to Snowden House. They went back inside, I guess, to work out what had happened here. What were the series of events that led to this man triggering the alarms and fleeing the scene? Was he trying to rob the place? And when they returned, when they made their way back inside the house, they made a truly horrific discovery. You remember that bundle of clothes that police noticed on the floor in one of the upstairs rooms, the bundle that seemed to smell like flammable liquid? Well, when the police went back inside and they started looking through this bundle, they realized that the clothes were actually hiding something, hiding someone. Underneath this pile of clothes was the dead and battered body of a woman. It was 63-year-old Martha McKay, the owner of Snowden House. She had been brutally murdered in her own home. It was later determined during autopsy that she had been both stabbed and bludgeoned to death. So this was an incredibly violent crime, and police recovered a blood-stained knife nearby her body. I mean, who on earth would have wanted to do this to Martha? What motive would someone have had to want this lovely, kind woman dead? Well, it seemed quite obvious to the police that the motive was robbery. Obviously, Martha was a very, very wealthy woman. Snowden House was a huge property, I imagine, with a lot of very expensive objects and artifacts within it. And actually, just feet away from Martha's body, police did discover this bag, which contained a load of expensive jewellery and other expensive items. So it was clear that Martha's killer had gone round the house, putting these items in the bag with the intention of stealing them, but clearly he wasn't able to grab the bag to take before the police arrived at the scene, and he had to flee out of the bathroom window. He clearly also intended to cover up the crime by setting Martha's body and the house on fire, hence why the clothing that covered her had been doused in flammable liquid. But again, he didn't have a chance to follow through with that before police arrived at the scene. But who was this man? Who killed Martha McKay? Obviously it had to be that guy that jumped into the lake, but who was he? Well, it wouldn't take long for police to establish that, discover the identity of this man, just hours after police were called at around 11 AM on the 25th of March 2020. Search and rescue finally recovered the perpetrator, the man who jumped into the lake. They recovered his body. As I said, he never resurfaced after jumping into the water. He drowned in that lake, and when his body was recovered and been pulled out of the water, police were stunned to discover who this man was, who had cruelly taken the life of Martha McKay. It was none other than Travis Lewis, the man who had been convicted of murdering Martha's mother Sally and her cousin Lee more than 2 decades earlier, had now also taken the life of Sally's daughter. Travis had always protested that he was innocent of killing Sally and Lee, and Martha believed him. All these years she stood by him, she forgave him, she helped him to get out of prison, even giving him a job after his release, and this was how he repaid her, by brutally stabbing and beating her to death, and for the same reason that he killed Sally and Lee, for money. Once again, Travis Lewis's motive for his crime was robbery. Apparently, when his autopsy was conducted, it was found that Travis had many different drugs in his system. He had marijuana, methamphetamines, and also cocaine, so perhaps he wanted money for drugs. And after speaking to Martha's family members, police discovered that Travis may have actually stolen cash, a huge amount of cash from Martha in the lead up to her death. You see, not long before she was killed, Martha had apparently sold this chandelier from Snowden house for $10,000, and the buyer of this chandelier paid her in cash, which Martha hid away somewhere in Snowden house. Well, apparently just the day after this sale, Martha checked wherever she put this cash and it was gone. This huge amount of money was suddenly gone. Clearly it had been stolen, and Martha was certain that she knew exactly who had stolen it. It had to have been Travis. He had access to Snowden house because he obviously worked there. Apparently he'd been working there on the day that the money went missing. He was one of the only people working there that day, and of course with his history of theft and robbery, she just knew. She knew that it was him, and so according to sources, she confronted Travis about this and she fired him. She told him that she didn't want him coming back to Snowden house ever again. I mean, of course she didn't. Can you imagine how betrayed she must have felt after everything that she had done for him? So was Travis angry? Was he enraged that Martha had fired him? Was he perhaps scared that she was going to go to the police about the theft of this $10,000 and decide to kill her to silence her? Well, we will obviously never have those definitive answers now, because Travis is the only person that could have provided them, and he was dead now too. And that feels like a very abrupt way to end this case, but that does conclude this case. Obviously there was no trial, no court proceedings. Travis never faced real punishment for what he did to Martha, because it all ended with his suicide, I guess, if he jumped into the lake to kill himself, which a lot of people do believe, I think, to avoid going back to prison for life again. But yeah, that concludes this case, the case of the Snowden family murders. Honestly, one of the wildest cases I think I've ever researched. I don't think I've ever come across a crime such as this one, where the perpetrator killed 3 members of the same family decades apart. I'm looking forward to hearing your guys' thoughts on this case in the comments down below. Again, please do let me know if you think Travis acted alone when it came to the murders of Sally and Lee, or do you think a second person was involved? But yeah, that concludes the case of Sally and Martha McKay and Lee Baker. A very, very tragic crime. Again, it breaks my heart that Martha did absolutely everything that she could to help Travis, help him get out of prison, help him rebuild his life after he was let out of prison, and he did this to her. He murdered her in the most brutal way imaginable. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Please do feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. You can pop them down in the comments below. I'm always looking for new case suggestions. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Mollie. Bye!